process, and it died about 2 months ago. Any questions on this, Scott?
Is there certain, if you're real familiar with any of the bills, if there's a certain portion of it that we're really the killer on?
Yeah, I will tell you this. It really got into, here's the challenge. Okay, and I'm someone who I follow the Constitution through and through, and sometimes I find myself in this weird situation of believing what the feds are doing is unconstitutional. And yet, at the same time, there's this supremacy clause in Article 6. And so, trying to sort of work within those parameters can be a challenge. One of the provisions in the bill, probably the deal killer, had to do with basically saying, not only are we not going to follow them, but we're going to go after federal people trying to enforce the law. At least that's my understanding of what the bill did. It was a pretty big hammer.
And it actually said something effective arresting
federal
officers who attempt to enforce it.
Right. So not only were we not going to be accomplices, so to speak, we weren't going to go along with it. That's one degree. The next degree was we're actually going to arrest those who do, federal agents or different, and so that does create a little bit more of an uphill battle. Because you're going to have people like me, I consider myself a purist when it comes to the Constitution, who are going to look at that and say, okay, I have to kind of gloss over the supremacy element there. I understand what's trying to be accomplished, which is not violating our Second Amendment rights. But at some point, you're going to have a challenge in all likelihood on this issue. I'm not saying I would have opposed it. I didn't really study it. I study what comes before me in the House. If it doesn't get to me in the Senate, I mean, I don't put as much time into it because I'm not voting on it. But I imagine that was probably the main issue of consternation there.
Most of those bills are going to be nullification.
Nullification.
Related bills, and you're talking about the supremacy clause a little bit, and so a lot of these are the nullification stuff.
Yeah, not all of these are. No, that's of all the ones on here. That's the most nullification oriented. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. You guys know. I mean, forgive me. Do you guys know what nullification means?
Yes.
There's a doctrine, maybe it's called the doctrine of nullification. Yeah, it's basically the idea that we, the states, have the right to declare something unconstitutional. And there's some diverse opinions as to whether or not that's legitimate or not, but that is a belief that some hold, is that we, the states, have the right to do, because we, at least initially, gave the power to the federal government and prescribed powers for it, that we can say, hey, what you're doing is not constitutional.
What that bill did was, it went beyond nullification. If you're actually having state employees arrest federal employees, that's in a position where you're actually taking, physical action.
Yes.
FYI.
Yes, you're right. You're right. It was a big bill, and it got weighed down by its components.
So probably taking that portion of it out of it and sticking to strictly nullification would probably make it a lot easier to be able to get through.
Yes, the actual physical act of arresting federal agents or federal, that's going to be a real tough sell. That's even a tough sell for me. I'm not saying no, but that's a real tough sell.
They passed it in Kansas, and they got an immediate reaction from Attorney General Holder.
No doubt. Yeah, and sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes bills are introduced as bills intending to send a message. And you could have to ask the sponsor or anyone who's supporting it what their intent is. But a message bill might be introduced knowing it's not going to get through the process, but it gets people's attention, it gets people thinking about it. I think there's value in that. And if nothing else, I think this bill did that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't able to get out of the Senate. Either wasn't able or it didn't. One way or another, it didn't make it out of the Senate. And so it never came over to the House. All right, moving on. Senate Bill 1115, the Healthcare Transparency Bill that was vetoed by the governor. This had to do with requiring hospitals to essentially tell folks how much various hospital services cost. And they had to pick, I think, the highest 25 on a chain store. But I think it's like the highest 25, or the most common, not the highest, the most common things that people want. When they go to the hospital, this is what they need. The most common, you could post them there. And the idea behind it was, we live in this very weird situation where we're not in control of our own health care. Even in the private sector, we're not. We go through an insurance company, they negotiate everything. We kind of show up, we give them a card, and largely stay out of it. And one of the arguments is that that's not good for driving prices downward. Although insurance companies, I suppose, have some desire to drive it downward, they pass a lot of that on to us as the consumer. And so if you want to take charge of your health care, one thing to know is, what are you paying for? So that was the idea behind the bill. It passed out of the legislature. The governor vetoed the bill. A variation of it has been amended onto another bill that's still alive, and we just voted on that in the House again. It's now, I think the Senate just voted on it. I'm not sure exactly where it is, because at this moment we've halted all bills because of the budget and Medicaid and those ongoing negotiations, because the governor has basically said no more bills or veto time. So.
And do you give a reason for vetoing it other than pressure from the people that are helping her support the Medicaid expansion?
That was not in her veto letter. However,
that's the reason.
What was in her veto letter had to do with the practicality of implementing it and different things. I didn't actually read the letter. I heard the snippets of it. But well, I'll be honest, what was interesting to me was that there was indication she was willing to work on it. And to her credit, I believe that the new version moving through has had her fingerprints on it and largely does what we're wanting to do. So I'm not sure that she was just saying, I don't know, we'll know better if that one gets vetoed, but I'm not quite ready to say she's a no on this. She was a no in the version we sent out. Was it just an excuse? Don't really know, too early to tell. And yes.
What number is the new one?
So you asked me numbers. It's not on my list, so I don't know numbers. I can tell you that it is a Heather Carter bill, and it has access in the title, AHCCCS in the title, and beyond that, I think it's, I want to say like 2305 or 2503. I don't know. I think it's got those numbers in it. Sorry, I've slept since then. Again, numbers not my strong suit.
It's going to show us an amendment on the website.
It already did. We already adopted it.
Right.
And we voted out of the House, and I believe the Senate was going to vote for it or had already voted for it. I'm not sure exactly.
They'll look for the House engrossed version?
No, it's
or the amendment itself?
Yes, you would look for the okay. So Karen worked at the Capitol, so she's talking capitalese here. There are various versions of the bill, and it'll be the House engrossed version that will have her amendment. It's a little paragraph in there, has it in there.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Does that give, price transparency then, pretty much the way the bill?
Yes, that was what the other bill intended, and the new bill, or the amendment to the other bill, is accomplishing, or trying to accomplish that as well. Yeah, price transparency. Yes, Chairman.
They just released, I can't remember the agency, top 100 procedures for every hospital in the United States. It's all over the newspapers. It's this transparency that you're talking about. I went to the newspaper this morning. It was showing one procedure, same procedure in Monterey, California, $228,000. In Ada, Oklahoma, $6,000. So I think that this transparency of these hospitals and the outrageous price differences that are happening is probably in the best interest of our consumers, because it was eye-opening to me when you look down these top 100 procedures, and they even listed hospitals here in Arizona. So how does that differ from what the governor or what Arizona's trying to do with this bill? Or is it the same?
I don't know that it is different. Yeah, I don't know that it is different, but you're right as far as the purpose of transparency and the disparity there that exists, and sometimes extreme. That's the entire purpose of what we're trying to get at.
I think Oklahoma, excuse me, is privatized a lot of their hospitals. And I usually medical things. Probably Arizona's
It's privatizing. Most of our hospitals are private hospitals or charity-based hospitals. You do have some county-run hospitals, and those are funded through a essentially a hospital district, so like a school district was a hospital district, but most of our hospitals are private. And now they get state money for certain patients, either through Medicare or Medicaid. They get state money for some of those patients, but as far as their management, we have the state has no real role in that. So I don't know how Oklahoma was before, but as far as where Arizona's at now, it sounds like that. Scott?
He mentioned medical savings account. We're on an HSA plan, no savings account, where I work. It's awesome. Yeah. And it's definitely the free market approach. Yeah, the way we should be known, in my opinion.
Yeah, and in the state, for state employees, HSAs are an option, actually. We a number of years ago went to what's called a self-insured program, and so one of the things you can do is you can set up an HSA as a state employee, and yeah, it's great. It's a great policy. Any other questions on that? Okay. House Bill 2573, the NDAA nullification, passed the House, was never assigned to the Senate. So the dynamics there are, by the time it passed the House, it was past the deadline for hearing bills in the Senate. This is the case of another bill down here too, 1403 Rio Summit Prohibition. That's the Agenda 21. That was the same thing, that by the time it passed the Senate, we were past deadlines for hearing bills in the House. So what will have to happen if they move is there'll have to be special meetings. So far those have not occurred. I don't really know if they will occur. I hope they do, because largely there was sort of some coalescing around what actually passed both chambers for the respective bills. But that will be a decision that gets mired in the budget talk. So we would have to make an exception. We don't like making exceptions, because once you open the door to one exception, you get all these other exceptions that people want as well. So it becomes a little more difficult to manage. Sometimes that no exceptions policy has victims like this bill. But I couldn't tell you right now what is going to happen, but what I can tell you is that unless there's a special committee to hear it, it is dead. And it'll be brought, this is the second year it's been brought up. It'll be brought up, or actually no, this is the first year for that one, the Rio one is the second, but it'll be brought up again next year. At some point we'll get something through. But the bill, are you familiar with the NDAA nullification bill? Yes. Okay, so for those of you who are not, it basically had the non-defense
authorization.
Thank you, yes. It was a federal law, some concern with that law, so it basically said, it was kind of like the Second Amendment bill I mentioned, but softer, in that it basically said, we are not going to help you implement that. There was no arresting or no, it was just, we're not going to help you do that. It's all right as a state. You can ask, you can request things of us in compliance with this federal law. We're not going to help you. And the motive behind that is some concern with what was in the law relating to being arrested and or tried and or killed
indefinitely held by the military of United States citizens on United States soil.
Right, which seems in contrast with habeas corpus and a whole other thing. Yeah. So that was the controversy, and basically said we're not going to go along with that.
Those two bills, JD, the NDAA and the Agenda 21 stuff are huge.
Yeah, I know. I agree. A lot of it had to do with things. I don't want to be critical of some of my colleagues, but sometimes people don't have the support they need, and by the time they make adjustments that they practically need to in order to get the support, they've waited too long.
Well, not just that, and I believe the NDAA bill last year passed both, and the governor vetoed it.
She did.
Yes,
yeah, that was a different version, but yes.
And then this year, my understanding was, from my understanding of the process, which is very minimal, is that committee chairman and or the speaker can pull things up anytime they want to and delay things, and that appears to be what happened with this bill.
In the case of the NDAA bill, yes, the speaker did hold it up. The speaker is not, the sponsor and the speaker have been at odds on some things, and so.
And the governor.
And the governor, that's true. And so that it was held up. But in the Senate, I have no reason to believe Biggs would have held up the Rio bill, so I think it was a lack of support until amendments were adopted, but by the time that occurred, then it was a timing issue.
Too late.
Yeah.
Killed.
Yeah. So. Okay, a couple of bills related to Common Core. I'm glad these are on here. So the first bill was 2425, passed out of the House. I supported it, went over to the Senate, and it died there. Then a scaled down version of it was amended onto House Bill 2047, passed unanimously out of the Senate, came back to the House. A lot more controversy over there, but it passed and was signed. So let me tell you what this bill did, and let me connect it or distinguish it really from Common Core. So in 2010, our State Board of Education, which is the chief policy-making entity for education standards, adopted what is called Common Core. It's called Common Core because a bunch of states got together, and experts and this and that, and tried to establish what would be common standards in certain areas, grade level by grade level. And then went back and sold it to the states. The feds offered a big carrot, said if you want Race to the Top money, which is a grant for something, you will do this. And nearly every state, if not every state, did, at least back in 2010, adopted these standards. It is not a curriculum. I think one misperception is that it's a curriculum. The way curriculum works is each school district sets its own curriculum. Now, obviously, standards drive curriculum, but each district set. The State Board of Ed has nothing to do with curriculum. We, the legislature, have nothing to do with, or very little to do with either curriculum or standards. That's really not our function. It's the function of the State Board. It's their constitutional function, actually. So they implemented this back in 2010. Over the last 3 years, this is what's been taught in schools to a certain generation of students moving through the school system. So before I get to the merits of Common Core, or lack thereof, if that's how you feel, I just want to talk about process for a moment. So we have currently, not anymore actually, but we had what was called the Ames test. The Ames test was set to our previous standards, and you had to pass that in order to graduate. Now over time, there had been some dumbing down of the standards. You got to a point you can augment your score through your grades, and because by the time Ames actually became what's called a high-stakes test, that means you passed it to graduate, or you don't pass it and you don't graduate. That's a big hammer. By the time it reached that point, people were kind of freaking out because the kids weren't ready, or concerned. I mean, if it's your kid who's not going to graduate, obviously you're concerned. So it's been watered down. A lot of controversy on the value of Ames anymore. So there's that dynamic. In addition, now that you have new standards, or different standards, some are better, by the way, than our previous standards, some are worse. You have a situation where students are being taught to a different set of standards. But in statute, you have the Ames test, and you have its requirement of passing it to graduate. Well, that creates a conflict now, because it doesn't line up with what they're learning. And so what the first bill did, it was a very comprehensive bill, but essentially what it did was remove Ames as a graduation requirement and require an assessment of some kind. The way Common Core works is instead of hitting you at the end, it's basically end of course testing. So it's you pass this in order to move on, you pass this in order to move on. They don't necessarily hold you back exactly, but it's a much more incremental approach as opposed to hit you at the end. Okay, again, I'm just talking process here. We'll get into Common Core in a second. So now we're in a situation where students have been taught something different, and so a bill's introduced to eliminate Ames and as a graduation requirement, and that was the bulk of what House Bill 2425 did.
2047.
No, first it was 2425. I'm sorry, you're right, 24. Thank you very much. See, I don't know it. 2047 was the original. That's right. 2047 was the original. It went over to the Senate. Because Common Core is very controversial, it died. Okay, the bill itself doesn't mention Common Core. There's no standards. There's nothing other than removing Ames. We had it all over Title 15. So we were pulling it out because it doesn't work. Yes.
It was removing Ames and replacing it with Park. By replacing it, yes, it was.
Did you read the bill?
I read the bill. I testified in both houses
Okay.
on it. I know it very
I should have
well.
brought a copy. Is Park mentioned in the bill?
Yes,
No, it is
in
not.
fact, Park actually gave a presentation during the hearing on the Education Committee in the House.
Okay, so Park is the name. It's called. It's a test, another test.
For assessments for college.
Ready? That's right. It is based on Common Core as the standards. I mean, it's a new test to Common Core. we have a difference of opinion on what the bill did, and I'm not going to get into a debate with you on this. I encourage everybody to actually read the bill. Actually read the bill, okay? Because, well, I'll tell you one thing that's really frustrating is if I get one more email forward from somebody who's just passing along what someone else said, I'm gonna scream, because it is not helpful. We are not sheep. We are not sheep. If you believe it because you believe it, great. But don't pass it along because someone else forwarded it on to you and so on and so forth. Pass it along because you believe it and because you know what you're talking about. Okay, I'm not meaning this in a disparaging way. I'm appealing to you because I am very concerned that the internet is the best and worst thing to happen to our democratic republic. All right? So that's just a whole other thing. But what in... Or what?
We have a representative republic, not a democratic republic.
Oh my goodness. We are a democratic republic. We are a democratic... Yes, we are.
Not a democratic
Okay, I'll get into a debate with you on that later too. Okay, so anyway.
Find democratic in any publication of the Constitution.
Okay, so what happened? The bill died. A lot of controversy in Common Core. A lot of people believe the bill was Common Core, and so it died. So what the president did was say, okay, what's the bare minimum of this that we can put in another bill that will prevent the situation where students are learning something different and are not going to graduate now because they're learning something different. So he crafted an amendment. It was added by Mr. Crandall. It was approved by the president, which is why it passed out unanimously. It was called now Common Core Junior. There is no reference to PARC in that. It is just a standardized test. It basically just removes Ames as a graduation requirement in the least minimum way possible. And that's what I voted on when it came back to the House.
Actually gutted Title 15. Gutted it.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, believe it or not, I do know what I'm talking about.
Well,
And-
you have a perspective.
But you say it guts Title 15.
So, but
Give his perspective.
we called him up to give his perspective, so let's let that happen.
Yes, ma'am.
What was the number of the bill that you
Sure.
voted on?
Okay, so the two bills. The original bill was 2047, and the new bill, it's very short actually, is 2425. There is a portion of the bill that deals with English language learners because that was the original underlying bill. Then the bare bones of the other version was added into the bill. Yes, to get rid of Ames. Yeah, it got rid of Ames, it got rid of norm reference testing, and got rid of the high stakes element. It's actually not very long. Again, I think it's just a few pages. I encourage you to all take a look at it so that it's not coming from me. Okay, so that's what happened with those two bills. Common Core. The difficulty with Common Core now is that A, it's in there, it's in the school system, and B, it is not our constitutional purview to establish core standards. Whether you can call them whatever you want, Common Core, whatever. So I think during this interim we'll be sitting down and have a conversation about how we want to do it. Go back to the State Board of Ed and see if, there was public testimony. I mean, there is a process for adapting standards, and I wish that the emotion and the investment and energy on this had been around back in 2010. That would have been far more helpful, because that's when they were adopting it. Yes, ma'am.
But the window was tiny.
And if that's the case...
It was the legislature wasn't even in session.
Yeah,
the grant information came out in November, and then in January it had to be turned in. So there was no chance for any kind of public input. You guys didn't have any.
Well, and we wouldn't, because we're not involved in that.
No.
We are not involved in the curriculum.
Public should be.
Under Title 15, the public should be.
And if there, and because I don't know exactly how, Race to the Top was not our decision, that was the governor's decision, but because we're not involved in that, I will grant you that maybe the window was too small.
It was through the country. I mean, everybody is kind of feeling blindsided.
Sure, yes, that is true. There are more states now, and not every state is set up the way we are, but there are more states now that are delving into this whole Common Core issue. It's obviously gotten a lot of attention, a lot of controversy, and so, part of the issue is there's a debate as to whether or not this is being federally driven or not. Certainly the feds offered $50 million or something like that to do it. 25 million, and we had to take it or leave it. We took it. Now there's the question of can we untake it? And there's all kinds of things we'll have to work through. And I suspect once we get past Medicaid in this budget, we'll probably talk about this more during the interim. But again, we are limited in our ability. The State Board of Ed is appointed by the governor, and so the accountability process is she should be accountable if they're doing something we don't like. And anyway, so we're going to work through it. I really have no opinion on Common Core, zero, because what I was voting on, from my perspective, had nothing to do with Common Core and everything to do with the practicality of what will happen with students get to graduation, and they have different standards that they're dealing with. And I wasn't willing to say, well, I'm going to send a message and screw them by not passing this, because that's all that would have happened from my perspective. Yes, sir.
The fact is that Common Core was only in from K through 2 during this time. And so that argument kind of loses ground, because when you get to 8th grade, those people were still Ames and still being tested and being taught to the Ames test, as was, and in fact, the superintendent of public instruction actually admitted the fact that the test scores would go down because they aren't teaching those standards.
Right, that's my point. You're making my point. They're not teaching those anymore.
They're not they're not teaching the Common Core standard. Now that we've got Common Core, our standards, our test scores will go down.
By the way, Superintendent Huppenthal is very big into this. Like, he's a big supporter. Again, I have no opinion one way, but he's a big supporter. He's been attempting to go around and talk to people to give his perspective. He was involved to some degree, I'm not sure exactly how much, but he was involved to some degree in the formulation of Common Core when all the experts and everybody were working on it.
We better move to the Medicaid.
Okay, Medicaid, yes, because I want to get the hook. So the situation with Medicaid is thus. The Senate last week decided to move a budget. The budget was introduced without Medicaid expansion in it. Unfortunately, the dynamic over there is that as the bills moved through the process, they got hijacked by a coalition of Democrats and a handful of Republicans. And Medicaid, not only did Medicaid get put in, but the rest of the budget got spiraled out of control. And so they ended up coming over to the House in the present form, which is Medicaid expansion and a whole heck of a lot more spending in the budget. It was the worst nightmare of us. I will just be blunt and say it was a colossal mistake to try and bring a budget to the floor. We were asking the Senate to not do that because I was concerned that by doing that, they would get hijacked and create momentum for the very thing we didn't want to have happen. But there was a belief, for whatever reason, that they could control it. They could not. It got hijacked. It's now in the House. At this moment, we are, as Mr. Petersen will tell you, we are sorting through what to do. There are two issues. The spending issue of the higher spending of the budget, which is essentially what the governor wanted in hers, and Medicaid. When it comes to Medicaid, there's a divergence of views as to whether or not it should be put on the board, let the chips fall where they may, or whether or not we say no, we dig in, and then the question becomes what happens to the House as time goes on if we dig in and say no. And so right now we've been soliciting member input, trying to figure out what to do now.
What do you mean by dig in? What happens in the House?
So so hypothetically we say no. A majority of the Republican caucus in the House does not support Medicaid, including me. A majority and Mr. Petersen. However, there is, I think, probably a majority of the chamber that does.
So another coalition of Republicans.
So there are 24 Democrats. You need 7 Republicans to get to your minimum 31. I think there are between 6 and 12. So if it's 6, well, they're 1 vote short. But if it's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, then they have their 31. Now, there's a different dynamic in the House that's to our advantage in that I don't think most of those people who would consider supporting it are willing to roll the speaker, like the president got rolled. So that's a huge advantage to us. But that lasts for a certain amount of time. And at some point, in my experience, at some point, if you run the risk of losing control of not only Medicaid, but the entire budget like what happened in the Senate. So right now we're digesting all this. We spent the last weekend and then the first couple of days here of this week just trying to figure out what happened in the Senate, because there was I've never seen so many amendments, 80 amendments, which is a lot, right? Yeah, it's astronomical, because this is not how the normal process goes. Usually it's more orchestrated. Instead, there was amendments being offered by both sides. President Biggs had like 20 himself, and everyone was trying to make it better, and others were trying to make it worse, and mostly the worst was winning. But, and so we had to just figure out what ended up getting in there. So we digested that. We met with our members of the House yesterday, going through mainly just saying, here's what the Senate did. Here's where we kind of were before the Senate went it alone, and then here's what came out of the Senate, and also here's the executive where she was. So we kind of outlined those three plans. And then it was, what do you want to do? It was kind of the question we threw out. And we have a wide range of people, from saying, absolutely not, we dig in, we say no, the majority of the caucus does not support this, don't put it up on the board, don't do anything, to others who support it, and obviously want it to go up, to folks in the middle who say, you know what, I don't support it either, but if we play this out wrong, we lose total control. So let's put a budget together that we like, make Medicaid a separate issue, put that up on the board, let people vote how they're going to vote, but maintain control of the rest of the budget. So there's various strategies, and they all have their weaknesses and strengths. Yes, sir.
What about the two-thirds possibility required because of the tax?
Great question. So one of the issues is that the voters of Arizona said if you ever increase a tax of the legislature, it triggers what's called a Prop 108. It was a Prop 108. It triggers a Prop 108, which raises the threshold to pass a bill from a simple majority to two-thirds. So in other words, if you're going to increase a tax, it's going to be a higher vote threshold, two-thirds vote. There was an exception put in there that said, but certain fees, and we do this periodically, but you can delegate and let, like say the licensing fee or whatever, and we're not going to get into the minutia every single little fee. So we're going to let directors and departments kind of work that out, and that bypasses 108. The governor believes her version, which is the largest tax increase we've had in a long time, is that it bypasses 108. But regardless, it's in the legislature, and here's how this would work. If we believe it's a 108, or someone believes it, they would offer an amendment that tries to add a Prop 108 clause to the bill. If the clause gets on there, then from that point forward, for that bill to move, it must reach the two-thirds threshold. However, if it takes a majority to put it on, right? So if you have a majority who know that putting it on will make it more difficult to pass, and a majority who wants it to pass, they will probably oppose the 108 addition. Does that make sense?
If is there a question, then there's judiciary after.
Yeah, so then someone will sue.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Prop 108 has never been litigated. There's no precedent. I mean, it'll be brand new territory. Who the heck knows what will happen? But someone will sue, no doubt about it, which creates, unfortunately, uncertainty in our budget, because if it's sued and it's struck down, it blows a $250 million hole in our budget, which, numbers-wise, it's substantial. And we're halfway through the fiscal year, and we're like, well, now we got a huge hole we got to deal with, and that's always a challenge. So yes, I think it's unwise, even if they're right in the end. Right now, there's a risk that can happen, and it's unwise to do that because it could create a major problem. But nevertheless, you can't stop it from not happening.
Is there any talk of just digging your heels in and just shutting down government? Just absolutely refuse to pass?
Yes, and that's what I meant before. That's one alternative. The danger is it takes 31 to do anything. Just like in the Senate it takes 16, it takes 31 to do anything. So we digging in works as long as there's 30 who agree.
So are you saying that the 31 could force the speaker to...
The 31 can do anything. I exaggerate, not anything. Okay. Replace the speaker, override the speaker, call it to the floor, take over, rewrite the bill, suspend all rules, anything. Constitutionally, 31 runs the show.
So if the speaker tries to hold it, that's not...
Right. That's what happened in the Senate. President Biggs tried to maintain control, but at some point a coalition formed and right over top. And that's the risk, and that's the problem, because then what's on the line is not just Medicaid, but the whole budget too. For instance, hypothetically speaking, President Biggs said, I don't want Medicaid, but I agree to put it up on the board if you agree to maintain the rest of the budget in this conservative way. The problem is he's got to agree to that. He doesn't want to put Medicaid up. So he doesn't agree to that, and I can understand why not. But then what happens is you lose control of it all. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you die. It's a catch-22. It's a Hobbesian choice. I mean, you can call it what you want, but it's a tough place to be.
You have a prediction?
Yeah, it's going to pass. That's my prediction is that sometime next week there will be a decision. I think that probably, and Mr. Petersen disagrees with me, but I think of the 36 Republicans in the House, that 18, which is half or more, are either yes votes or no votes, but willing to put it up and let the chips fall where they may. And if a majority of the caucus is okay putting it up on the board, I suspect that the Speaker will allow that to occur under the condition of the rest of the budget is going to be this. Far better than what the Senate did. That's the silver lining, is that if you can't stop it, and at this point there's a belief that, especially with the momentum coming from the Senate, there's a belief now it's difficult, if possible, to stop it. Then how do you try and get what you can
At least get rid of all the corn that got added.
Right, exactly right, exactly right. Yeah.
Common Core,
yes.
Medicaid expansion, if they pass. We've had this discussion in the past about things going to the ballot by initiative, by voter initiative. And then once it goes to the ballot, something passes the ballot, it usually comes back in a worse form.
Yeah,
so you see that happening, and people were so up in arms, grassroots were so up in arms about either one of those things that they went to the ballot with it and got their 84,000 signatures, went to the ballot, came back in a worse iteration.
Okay, so let me clarify. The 84,000 signature threshold applies to, which is the lower threshold in most initiatives, applies to if the legislature passes the bill. One of the reasons we wait 90 days for it to take effect after the end of session is to give people the opportunity to get enough signatures that they don't like what we did to force a vote. That's the purpose of waiting 90 days. Normally, to get something on the ballot, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of signatures, but you're limited with the 86,000 to just addressing something we did. So if we pass Medicaid expansion and you don't like it, yes, you could get 86,000 signatures to simply undo what we did. That's really all you could do. Common Core, you could undo the bill, essentially the removal of Ames. You could, if you got your 86,000, you get Common Core is in the State Board of Ed. So now, if you wanted to get an initiative and try and take over that whole thing, you could. That's a whole separate issue. Your hundreds of thousands of signatures, that whole thing. But as far as stopping what occurs at the legislature, that's what we're talking about. Yes, ma'am.
From what I read, the testing and the implementation of Common Core is going to be fairly expensive. That is one of the purviews of the legislature is to
funding.
The funding.
Yeah, it's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget at all.
Most of the expense of it has to do with the test transitions to essentially a computer-based testing, and so a lot of that is the setup cost of that. There's some also some training of teachers in the new way. Those are kind of the two costs being thrown out there. The governor had it in her budget. It was not in the Senate budget even that came over, and I doubt it will be there.
So Ames is gone. There's no funding for anything else to be implemented.
There will be another Park. That's what the State Board of Ed is going to implement. They were always going to implement that.
But how do they implement it without funding?
It's just another test. They would either have to adapt it in some way, or, I mean, I'm not sure. It's a good question. If we don't fund it, they'd have to adapt it in some way. There has to be an assessment of some kind. You have to have an assessment to comply with No Child Left Behind.
There's no test. It hasn't even been made.
That's true. It has not been made yet. They're in the process of making it.
We probably better wrap up here.
I don't want to steal Mr. Peterson's time. I'm sure there's lots of other things to say.
Well, I know that a lot of you came to hear Jennifer and Wes talk about Common Core as well, so don't want to make everybody wait past 8 o'clock to start that. So thank you very much for having me. Okay, and we will go ahead with Representative Petersen, and he is a freshman congressman this time around, and representative, sorry. Yeah. So, well, last time I introduced him, I said he was his brother, so I'm going to do it better this time. And he ran on a platform of constitutional, supporting the sanctity of life, and that's what he's done since he's been there in the legislature. He's really fought for a lot of liberty legislation, and so we're really grateful for what he's working for there. And so he's from Gilbert, LD 12, married and with 5 children, and he's not a lawyer. No, not that it's got to be a lawyer. But he comes from the building industry, so turn the time over to Representative Petersen.
You guys had any breaks yet? No. Do we need a break?
No.
You guys okay?
We'll take a break to set up the projector.
You guys are diehards. Okay. So I have 11 minutes because I believe in being on time.
Can you take 20?
Sure. Well, I'll shoot for. Tracy asked me to talk about a few things. I'll hit some of those things. She also asked me to bring up some other bills and things that are happening. I also drafted an op-ed today that I'm going to send out to every media outlet in Arizona. If you want to hear why conservatives oppose the expansion, I'll be happy to share that too. But first of all, she asked me about Senate Bill 1403, which was the Rio Summit prohibition that passed the Senate but never was assigned in the House. So that bill actually got amended onto a bill at the very end, a House bill, by Carl Seal. And we had a hefty debate on the floor, and this will give you a little bit of insight of knowledge down at the legislature. As we were debating this issue, I asked the minority leader what the 9th Amendment to the Constitution was, the Democratic minority leader, and he said, "I don't know." He didn't know what it was. And he was kind of flailing a little bit, so I thought I'd throw him a softball. So I said, well, tell us the 10th Amendment. Because everybody knows the 10th Amendment, right? Right. So, but he didn't know that one either. But anyways, so unfortunately, that one did end up passing out, but it was too late in the session. So that's one we'll have to hit next year. I do worry, though. I don't know that that's one the governor signs. Legal tender bill. Your question was, what happened? What will happen? How can we help this progress? Legal tender bill. That bill did pass both chambers, vetoed by the governor. So what can we do? Well, I think the sponsor could possibly work with the governor's office and see if there's some minor tweaks so that it still resembles the bill, and then hopefully get it passed next session. Otherwise, again, you're looking at the same issue. You're going to have to wait.
And they did meet with the governor, by the way. They did meet with the governor, and they're working with her to try to get her to undo her veto, but I don't know if they'll have success with that.
Yeah, so you may have to be looking at a change of scenery there as well. Why don't I share my op-ed here on Medicaid expansion? This is why conservatives oppose the expansion of Obamacare. So the battle of the expansion over Obamacare in Arizona resembles the fight between David and Goliath. The pro-expansion team has millions of dollars, powerful lobbyists, the support of all of the Democrats, most, if not all of the media, and a few Republicans that have defected to their cause. You've probably heard an ad on the radio. Watch one on ESPN. I did. I was watching ESPN. Whoa, there's my governor. Or received a glossy full-page mailer promoting their conservative plan. The only problem is there's no conservatives that support this plan. And let me tell you why. Here's a few reasons. First of all, we don't fall for optical illusions. When the pro-expansion team bussed in 300 people, we knew that was a facade of support. When they say 63,000 people will lose coverage, we know that's not true. They had a person there speak at the rally who was on Medicaid. He said he was going to lose coverage. He would not lose coverage, whether this thing passes or not. That's not true. They'll continue to have coverage with or without the expansion. And even let's say it was true. If it was true, with a minimum wage job, you can qualify for the health insurance exchange. So we stick to the facts. We know that this is more about money. It's not about compassion that is driving this train. A train that Harry Reid said will wreck without the appropriation of more federal funds. And do you think that Congress is going to give them more funds? They're already starting to borrow from one silo to another, and I don't see a Republican House appropriating them more funds. Conservatives know that the budget that was put forth by President Biggs will not drain the rainy day fund. People are saying that. That's not true. Because it included a request to renew our federal waiver. And the pro-expansion team said the waiver had been denied, when in reality it has not. What they did was they cut and pasted an FAQ from the web and said, look, we received a denial. No, taking an FAQ from the web directed to 50 states that's guidance is not taking your plan, submitting it to the federal government, and receiving a denial letter. If you ever get that deep into the weeds with somebody in this debate, just say, show me the denial letter. They can't do it. Ironically, this is the same argument that the Democrats made a few years ago when we last requested the waiver. So they're now making the same argument the Democrats. We can't get the waiver. But guess what? We did get the waiver last time. And do we really think they'll deny the waiver when the Supreme Court has ruled you can't coerce people into the expansion? We also know the expansion doesn't deal with health care for poor children. We're talking about adults, and of which many of them have incomes above the poverty level. And we aren't talking about people that can't work. Disabled people, they have and will continue to have coverage. So we've learned from history. We know that we can afford to wait a year with or without the waiver. Whether we get the waiver or not, Arizona could easily wait a year. To implement Medicaid, Arizona almost waited 20 years. And we're told we have the best Medicaid in the country. Well, under that logic, we could wait 20 years before we expand, and then we'll get the best expansion in the country. Right? However, but guess what? Even the pro team, they're saying Obamacare is going to implode. They admit that. If you ask them, they will say, yeah, Obamacare is going to implode. And the expansion will implode with it. And it would be very foolish for us to add on to something that's already falling apart. And it hasn't even started yet, and they're pushing things back. So we know the numbers don't add up. Conservatives don't raise taxes on hospitals as a gimmick to draw down federal funds, and they don't put hundreds of thousands of people on a welfare program that will cost billions over the next few years. Billions will be added to the national debt, of which some will be used to fund abortions. Fortunately, half of the states have now refused the expansion. They've taken advantage of this golden opportunity to cut federal spending. Thank goodness half of our country has the integrity to not take the bait of a 10-to-1 match. That's how bad this thing is. It is so bad they had to bribe us with a 10-to-1 match. Who's going to turn that down? Just people with integrity. And obviously it looks like about only half the country has that. We believe in the American dream. Every able body who can work should be working. As mentioned before, a minimum wage job qualifies a person for the health care exchange. This will increase wealth and allow further contributions to society. How many people are not working right now because they don't want to lose Medicaid? Imagine if they were working, further contributing to society. This society has been the most prosperous in the world because it has promised people they could keep what they have earned. Nations which have guaranteed people benefits that others have earned have failed. Conservatives understand that, and they know the expansion is nothing more than a massive growth of the welfare state. Representative Petersen, District 1. So I have 2 minutes left. So let me talk to you about some of the bills that I was really disappointed this session that did not pass. We have a Republican House, we have a Republican Senate, and we have a Republican executive branch. And we ran union bills this session. Here was a bill I ran. This simple, very fit on a little bit of the page. Simply said this: taxpayer funds cannot be used for union activity. Taxpayer funds cannot be used for union activity. Do you think that one's a no-brainer? Every single person I emailed thought it was. All of my constituents thought that was a no-brainer. And couldn't even get that out of committee. So,
Which committee did you put out?
government. Sure don't. Ugente. She voted. She supported it. But anyways, that was a disappointment. I think we can improve on that. But there was some great news. There were some really great bills that happened this session. And I don't need to talk about the other bad bill. I know she's going to cover that one. But pensions for politicians. I sponsored a bill that will eliminate pensions for politicians. It just happens to get. Imagine this: the politician pension plan was the most gracious of all the pensions that exist right now. So, the great news is that passed out of the House on party lines. So, all the Republicans voted for it, all the Democrats voted against it. Passed out of the Senate. There was an amendment. It's coming back. JD, do you have any idea when that one will be voted on?
Well, it's probably being held up along with the rest of the bills waiting for the budget.
Yeah, so
is that
go with the
just
budget.
state politicians, or is that all politicians?
It is any elected official that's in York. Yeah, but it has to be prospective. I refused the pension. I didn't take the pension, so but it's from people from that day going forward. But yeah, it's anyone in York. So I don't know. Is the mayor in PSPRS? I think some of them are in.
They are in PSPRS.
They are.
Yeah.
So
it is also a budget item. There's a $5 million cost for the state.
Because it's upside down. It's a Ponzi scheme, and we got to just cut the bleeding, pay it off, get out. Yes.
Do you see that as a way to improve the quality of the elected officials by taking away their pension? They'd be older probably.
Personally, I think any financial incentive you take away from a politician is good. Me personally, that's my personal philosophy. So, I know that. Anyways, yes, I have seen people strategically do things to make sure they get that pension. So, clean elections. There was a bill. I hope it comes back. I hope it makes it back. But that would basically eliminate government funding politicians from running for office. I thought that was a good bill too.
Do you know what number that was?
I could pull it up for you.
Okay.
I don't have it.
Any of these ones that died, I'd like to have the numbers just so we can.
I'm hopeful that one's going to pass.
Support them.
I think that one will pass.
Okay.
The only
That'd be
the only ones that died that I was really disappointed with pension. The unions.
But how can wasn't that a voter?
Yeah.
How can you get rid of it through the legislature if the voters voted for it? Is that
The clean elections? It'll be referred to it'll go to the ballot.
Oh.
So it still has to pass to go out to the ballot. Yes, sir.
I wonder if everyone in here knows what that union bill was.
The one I just mentioned, it was a simple bill. It simply said, it's House Bill 2343. House Bill 2343.
If it was to pay union employees to do union work.
Yeah.
Our taxes.
Yeah, and there is some good news to follow up on that. The city of Phoenix, I think it had 28 police officers that were doing union activity rather than police work. And in fact, this is pervasive. In fact, all of you, if you want to do something, what's really exciting is if you do something locally, city, school board, you can make a huge impact. And if you guys want to get rid of this in your city, this is something you could do. We just got rid of it in Gilbert. Because my brother's on the council, and the guy reads everything. And he didn't even know about the release time. He didn't know about that the unions were being paid in Gilbert. And I called him up when I found out about it, and I said, hey, do you guys get paid? Do you have a term in your MOU called release time? And he goes, I don't think so. He digs it up, 44-page document. Yes, we do. And he was livid, and they're getting rid of that. But that's something you guys can get rid of. People don't even know that there are police and firefighters that are being paid not to do police or fire work, but full-time union work on the taxpayer dime.
Other unions too, not just those two.
Yeah, well, those are the two big ones in the public sector. So, one more question, and I'll step off. I'm 5 minutes over.
Go till the 2.
Any other questions?
10 after.
Yes, the Venerable LaFaro.
Representative Mesnard had his prediction concerning Medicaid expansion. What's your prediction?
I am the eternal optimist. We can always win. It's, when they get, hey. you know, the six, and I will respectfully disagree with with Representative Mesnard too on the Senate budget. I mean, there's lots of ideas and theories, but I think our job is to move a budget, and we could have moved a budget, but the Senate moved a budget, didn't have Medicaid on it, and it asked for the waiver. It would not drain the rainy day fund, and so I mean, that's our job. Our job is to pass a budget. They moved a budget. My kind of sense, if I have a preference, there's a lot of us and there are a lot of moving parts, but I say we kill what they sent over to us, just vote it down, create a conservative budget without the Medicaid expansion, and work to get that passed. But obviously we have a huge struggle, and it's going to be a battle. So, any more questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about drones?
Drones. Oh, yes. Sorry. So there was a bill I sponsored that would prohibit unwarranted drone use. That was killed in committee. I'm not sure what more can be said about that.
What can we do? Because there was that other bill that, so the one that you sponsored or co-sponsored is dead, but then the other bill, which was completely toothless, was sent to a study committee.
Which basically means it's dead.
Yeah, it's dead for now.
Yeah.
But we don't even like that one because it's totally weak.
Yeah.
And so what can we do?
What can we do? Well, again, you start getting ahead of the game. Fall is when you really can start lobbying people. But even now, I mean, you can start working on people now. You guys could start working legislators right now on that bill. You could start meeting with them, lobbying them down at the Capitol and trying to get their support for that bill. And you can work with the people on the committee, find out why it died, what they were opposed to, try to tweak some things. I think if 40 of you guys showed up, or 20, or maybe 10 of you showed up to individually meet with each committee member, you probably have a good chance of getting that out of committee. So.
Since the chair is our representative as well.
Even better.
So.
That makes it even better. So, yes.
One more thing. Any comments after your first, towards the winding down of your first legislative session? Eye-openers.
Yes, I think it's
throngs of lobbyists down there.
It's different for everybody. I think for me, the first 3 weeks was disillusioned, angry, disappointed, and then one day I woke up, I was like, wait a minute, I'm one of 90 people down here. This is great. I can do something about this. So at first I was actually somewhat disappointed, but frustrated. But it's exciting. You know, I have a voice, so I can make a difference. So. Do what I can. So thank you all for having me tonight.
So we'll take a 5-minute break. There's drinking fountains and bathrooms out here in the hall, and then we'll get going with the Common Core.